Hello and welcome to the Sparks and Honey Culture Briefing on the biggest food and beverage influences impacting the industry in 2024. My name is Claire Koenig and I'll be your host today. Joining me as co-host is Corey Manna, VP of Client Strategy. And then we have a really exciting panel of guests to unpack all the different forces and shifts that are going to impact this industry. We have Danny Thibodeau, Director of Cultural Strategy. Alice Lee is joining us remote, another Director of Cultural Strategy here at Sparks and Honey. And then we have an external guest. Analisa Winther is here. Analisa is a global ecosystems developer and innovation coach within the food system. She also is the host of the Future Food podcast and has a consulting practice working with industry leaders on innovation strategy. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I've been working on global ecosystem development for the last 12 years, so looking at how do we transform the future food system to serve both people and the planet. And my specialty is working with corporate venture capital arms and corporate innovation units, as well as working with the leaders of tomorrow. So who are the people that are developing the products and services and bringing those into being that are going to influence how we interact with food.
Amazing. I love that you bring this wealth of future knowledge to today's discussion, because we are going to be talking about this guiding question you see behind me here. Essentially asking, what are the key factors influencing the food and beverage industry in 2024? And maybe we'll even talk about beyond. And how can companies create winning strategies in line with these shifts? So at Sparks and Honey, when we have a big question, a big query, we take it to our Q Omni cultural intelligence system that allows us to take a view at what's happening on the web. What are the different articles, patents, what's the conversation on Twitter happening around this subject, to try and understand what elements of culture are popping most frequently. So we do this using AI. And as you can see from the chart, we have super apps. This is unsurprising when we talk about the future. We talk about AI innovation, app innovation, polarization. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the politics of food. But we wanted to approach today's structure of discussion a little bit differently and organize these elements of culture into a STEEP analysis framework. So the STEEP analysis framework is a speculative design thinking strategy that allows you to look horizontally at culture to understand the major influences and shifts that are impacting a certain segment. So for example, today we're going to be talking about food and beverage. So as we go through the signals and the articles today, we're going to organize them according to social, technological, economical, environmental, and political, and filter that through an element of culture specifically. Corey, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, it's worth noting that what you see on the screen here for the STEEP elements of culture, those are the objects in the hexagons, are actually the elements of culture that came back from our query on food and beverage. So we'll be making a connection around what we're seeing culturally in relation to the query in the context of the STEEP, so that we can get that horizontal perspective as a way to explore what is ultimately affecting an industry from the outside.
Mm-hmm. If I can add, one of the things I love about food is that it is exactly related to all of these, and it is, I believe, one of the biggest vehicles for change that we have, because it touches every single part of society and it touches us every day, all the time. So I love that it returned exactly those results, because it's so fundamental to who we are and how we live.
Amazing. Let's get into the first one. Corey, you want to take us away?
Excellent. So we're gonna spend the time unpacking these 5 letters in STEEP. So we'll start with sociological. And what we're doing today, we have a unique format set up for each of the 5 sections. We're gonna block 2 signals for every 5 sections. So I'll take you through the first 2 here for sociological implications. And they are structured, as you can see on the screen, through 2 lenses, one being what's macro happening in sociological space as it pertains to our query around and the EOC wellness design, and then what's happening in the food and beverage specific space around wellness design that has sociological implications. So I'll take you through the first 2, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. As you can see on the left, not surprisingly, there's a ton of news around GLP-1s, the use of Ozempic in society at large. And this is an interesting signal about Ozempic, because it's around older Americans, and they are increasingly being prescribed GLP-1 drugs for true medical needs, diabetes, obesity, et cetera. And they actually now are making up, if you can believe this, 26.6% of the population who is being prescribed these GLP-1s. However, what we're seeing is that there are some concerns that are happening for this particular older audience around the long-term effects of these treatments, specifically due to the unexpected benefit, if you will, of rapid weight loss, which is actually a very controversial health issue that is something handled very sensitively for older communities amongst the doctors that provide health solutions. And this ultimately leads to things like bone loss, loss of bone density, loss of muscle mass, et cetera, when you're dealing with an older population. And therefore, Ozempic now comes with an increasing risk of fractures and other health issues for a certain subset of a population. So think about that from a sociological standpoint, because on the flip side, there's also the element of how Ozempic is impacting the food industry. And that's signal number 2 here. And this is around the food industry is adapting to the rising use of GLP-1, specifically for weight loss, by repositioning existing products known as companion items. So these are items that are developing like portion-controlled type solutions, nutrient-rich snacks, and really sort of also new products that are trying to naturally provide satiation in place of people who don't want to take a pharmaceutical solution like a GLP-1. Major companies such as Danone, Nestle actually see opportunity for growth to lean into the Ozempic trend within the food industry by providing high protein, low fat offerings, nutritional supplements, et cetera, that would be complementary and suitable for a GLP-1 user. So here you've got this example of Ozempic out there in society at large. It's got some pros, some cons. It's an example of an unexpected phenomenon happening in the pharmaceutical space that ultimately is having an impact in food and beverage. So this is interesting from the standpoint of it's got some varying pros and cons that could be potentially substantial for a food and beverage company. So based on that, how do food and beverage companies adapt their strategies? How do they need to lean into something like this, knowing that on the one hand, it can have some cons, but on the other hand, it may have some pros associated with it, to ultimately navigate something unforeseen like the influence of Ozempic? So a little bit, maybe Dani, if you want to start.
Yeah, just thinking about food's role in society, like Analisa was saying in general, of food is a social lubricant. Food is a cultural connector. Food is so much more than just what we put in our bodies in general. So right now it's all about high protein and building muscle and building strong tissues and ligaments in our bodies, which are very important and is very interesting from the standpoint of prescribing these types of drugs to older consumers who maybe didn't come up or grow up with the knowledge of weightlifting and thinking about taking care of their body in that specific way, but also thinking about what are those other things that we can create social norms around that aren't necessarily about, okay, it's high protein on the packaging today, but 6 months from now, that might be out of vogue for a lot of people because they're feeling like it maybe messed up their digestive system or other things like that. So really thinking about what are those cultural pieces that they can tap into from a food brand perspective and how they market to people.
Yeah.
Do you find that the cultural perspectives that you mentioned, do they move quickly? Do clients have to come up with different approaches to be prepared to lean into something that could be, a fast-moving cultural influence? I'm kind of curious. I wanted to build off of that a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like there are certain things that are not fast-moving, like gathering together around traditional recipes, but also the concept of like snacks versus meals. That is also something that has been ongoing over the last couple of years of how people are using food in those instances. So in terms of tapping into moments, I think it's more about like gathering and connecting with other people and how do you do that? So those are more lasting things as opposed to talking about like the specific elements of what's in it and maybe the messaging on the packaging in any given moment.
Interesting.
Yeah, to build on that, in response, we are definitely seeing a trend where like the rise of gut health, the brand gut access, gut access, they're just like the growing attention towards like gut health. And definitely we're seeing like the gut health brands, they position themselves as either substitutes or like complements to weight loss drugs like the Ozempic economy. So many brands we see they emphasize their role in fortifying the gut to offset some of the side effects Corey just mentioned. One particular super gut interestingly like reposition itself as the nature's response to Ozempic, and in its like recent rebranding effort, like it highlights its range of like prebiotic sourced from like fibers aiming to promote gut health and alleviate those side effects. So we are also seeing like the growth of like their health focused restaurants, like there's CAVA like serves like Mediterranean food are getting more consumers recently. So we also seeing like more partnership happening. So like the Daily Havers, like a burger meal delivery now offers meals just for people who taking Ozempic. They are partnering with like Noom, like a weight loss like diet program. So we are seeing like food and beverage companies, they are like quickly react and to respond to this like Ozempic trend. Mm-hmm.
I'm really intrigued by the idea of what is the new fortification. You know, if we think about fortification is not a new concept in principle, it's been around for decades, but are there new and untapped opportunities, more substantial fortification benefits that are potential for exploration?
Analisa, what are your thoughts on this?
We have a saying that you pay your farmer or you pay your pharmacist. And I think this is a very good example of what you eat can just fix your biodiversity and gut health issue. And that's definitely something we've always seen with medication, that you're looking at how do you offset side effects. What I find so interesting about this one is that there's two core desires when I think of consumers. One is weight loss. I want to feel good. I want to look beautiful. I want to be skinny. And the other is the very real medical issue that people suffer from having diabetes. And I think that spillover or the question I have around this is, how long is this trend going to stay? And is this going to be something where people really incorporate it into their identity? I know that older people might be getting subscribed to this, but it's working, so celebrities started doing it. Young people are starting to do it. And as we just heard, we're also seeing that meal plans are coming up, so you could choose the option of vegan, but you could also choose the option of I take Ozempic. And then that creates a whole personalization for you. So I think it's linked to deeper things of what is the core desire you're going after and what's really going to help you. But we know that the best thing you can do is to eat higher quality foods and a more diverse array. The last thing I'll add is the average household eats, I think, the same 12 meals in rotation. So getting people to actually change their diet is harder said than done. And that's very sociological. It's very cultural. It's very ingrained in how you grow up and how you think and feel about food and your attachments.
I'm glad you brought up the high quality element too, because we'll tap into a little bit of that when we get to one of our E's later on in the discussion.
Should we move on to a T, technology here? So the featured EOC is super apps. We're going to talk a lot about the innovations happening around Gen AI. As far as our macro signal, we were reacting to the launch of just endless new applications that are putting personalization and choice in the hands of the consumer. So, for example, the Samsung's Galaxy S24 has all these really interesting AI-powered features. So they've got one called Circle to Search. So if you see an image of something, or let's say even the example that they use in this article, you're watching a Facebook, an Instagram reel, and someone's making a recipe, and you don't understand I've never seen that ingredient before. What is that? You can circle it, and it will open up a browser as to what it is, where you can buy it, other recipes you might use it for. Really interesting example there of how search in general with TikTok even is changing how we search for things, but also how we create our meals. I'll also mention that they have live translate, so you can speak to someone on the phone in a different language live, and it will translate in real time your discussion. And then fun stuff like you can take any photo and it will turn it into an emoji, and AI photo editing. So in general, just the choice being in the consumer's hands here. The second signal is from Hello Corp, and they have this AI-powered Nutramatic product that they're going to be releasing later this year. And it personalizes daily nutrition intake based on an individual's biodata status. The device is aiming to make optimal health more accessible and accurate for everyone. So, question here for the panel, if consumers have the power to understand the exact implications of food on their body, so this device and where we're headed with these likewise devices is do a body scan, what nutrients do I need? Maybe do a body scan after and say, oh, that did work or that didn't work. My body reacts this way to eggs, it reacts this way to soy. What might that mean for the future of a brand's products and how they market them and how they talk about them with this new level of efficacy? Analisa, do you have a thought here?
Oh yeah, I have lots of thoughts. I think there's two things I found interesting. One, when I heard about the smartphone thing and you get to circle what it is you're interested in, I'm just thinking of all the influencers who have built a business on social media where they do clear product placement deals, but what happens if there's just an item you bought in the background that you don't have a deal with, but suddenly someone's then driving traffic to it? So does it then become that your whole house is a set and everything you eat is something that can be commoditized, or everything you buy? I don't know. But I thought about it's going to be the most micro decisions that then are potentially leading to influence. I think personalized nutrition has been a big trend in the industry that hasn't totally been cracked, and the real question here is going to be about information overload. I know I've been on my own hormonal health journey and experimenting with this and understanding my own body's natural rhythms and cycles as part of my work. And you can get all of the data, but if you don't know how to interpret it or actually listen to your body, it's very hard to make use of it. So I think there's a question around longevity of how to get people to actually implement what they learn, because honestly, are you going to check your phone every time you eat and do this very mechanical process? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also saying the emotional impact of food that it has on people's bodies as well. It's hard to crack that when you have all of the information available. You know what your body needs from a listing standpoint, but emotionally what your body needs might be telling you something completely different. So with the technology piece, there's other aspects of this that by having all of these devices that are tracking everything, that might stress you out. That might then change your hormones. That might then change what you actually need for your body in general. So there are a lot of different factors at play here.
I'm intrigued too about the implications of, agree that the data has a potential to overload, but if we put the data volume aside and we think about the data type, what impacts there are from a transparency standpoint? If there's a better sense of the physiological implications of what I consume, then as an organization, do I have to rethink claims strategies, my claim statements, what my benefit statements are as a product, if I know now that, yes, it does have, there is no sugar in it. Yeah, that's a benefit, that's a claim, but perhaps there's other aspects of a particular food that's consumed that now all of a sudden either there might be new benefits that you're learning about it because of this traceability, or there's new risks that have to be sort of mitigated in how you are talking about a product.
To build on what Corey mentioned, I definitely feel like there's a larger transformative shift around measures for change. So as the public's understanding of the feedback loop between the real-time health prediction and the food we take becomes more visible and immediate. So it definitely impact the way we their consumption needs. So ingredient consciousness has been building up in our culture for a while, and it's nothing new. But with this constant closed loop data, we have further transformative impact. So for consumers will be even more hyper focused on what they are eating, and it would just not be perceived at a subjective level, but quantified in the moment with data. So for example, the conditions such as heart health, sleep, performance, those conditions can be tracked. They are likely will gain tractions in the coming future, and we will know Samsung, Apple, they have their eyes on some of their accurate glucose monitoring, for example, those newer we know some of the more powerful health features that are coming along the way. So those who definitely, the conditions can be tracked by consumers on a daily basis would likely gain tractions, and the food and beverage could definitely tap into this opportunity to innovate towards these conditions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think that you could know, well, actually aspartame is not as good than sugar, or maybe honey. You can kind of test and find for yourself. I feel like the way, oh, yes, Saif. Oh, I mean, I was just thinking, we get a lot of our data on food from really large sample sizes, and we see what works for most people. Well, in this case, it's a sample size of one, but it's the most important data to you. It's just you, and it's a kind of interesting way of approaching data and efficacy.
I was going to say, I remember in the 90s, orange juice was just orange juice. Like, you didn't have 8 varieties of it. And then like a decade later, there was like orange juice with and without pulp if you wanted fiber, and then orange juice with calcium and vitamin A and vitamin D. I'm wondering, if you did have more frequent information about deficiencies, right? If that doesn't create an opportunity for some of the staple foods like milk or orange juice to fracture and create variations that fill in the gaps of things that people need. Now, I never understood why you couldn't just take a multivitamin and solve all those problems, and why you had to have it in orange juice, but if it works, isn't that an opportunity?
Yeah, definitely.
You have thought on that?
I just keep going back to this feeling of let's not overcomplicate it. We could create more SKUs, but I think what consumers want is just to know this food is good for me and I don't have to think so hard. Because to read every ingredient label, to have to sift through what's the best thing, it creates a lot of effort, and it doesn't make it leaning into a trend of convenience. It doesn't make it easy for me to buy if I have to think so hard about is this even good or right for me or anything else. You get analysis paralysis.
You may also be bringing up sort of a sort of implied point too, that a situation like this may be targeted for certain niche consumers, i.e. I need to manage a condition, so that'd be your glucose monitoring devices that are now patches on arms that allow you to track and also provide treatment, or perhaps it's a little bit more niche for certain athletic performance needs or whatnot for people that might be more in tune to really wanting to be narrowly, evaluating their sort of physiological responses, if you will.
Certainly there's an opportunity for increased research and development in this area. Should we go into our next section here?
Sounds great. So we're going to talk economical, and for this one we're focusing on the element of culture that came back from our Zeitgeist map on small scaling. And we'll talk a little bit more about to the point that you were making during the sociological discussion. But the first signal that we wanted to talk about here at the macro level was this behavior that we're seeing happening where a lot of people are moving back in with family due to inflation, and that behavior is becoming a lot more common. There was a recent study done by the U.S. News and World Report that found that many Americans are moving back in with their families or acquiring roommates in the economic times that we're currently navigating, often due to inflation and rising costs of living. There were 2,000 respondents in this survey who either moved back in with family or got a roommate in 2022. 52% of those respondents said that they intend to live with the family or with a roommate for more than 1 year. So that is a longer term sort of scenario. And 72% believe that multi-generational households are becoming more accepted due to these cost of living increases. So all of this is signaling perhaps that this is a potential normalization of this new sort of living behavior that has a sort of a longer tenure or potential stay in our society. And then on the other side of the equation, the second signal is around focusing on how U.S. consumers are coping with rising food prices as resulting from a survey done by Gardner. And this survey reveals that U.S. consumers are engaging in cost reduction behaviors such as buying cheaper brands, eating out less due to rising food prices. Survey also shows that food insecure households are unfortunately most affected, with many of these households reporting more coping mechanisms and reduced purchasing of fruits, vegetables, and proteins, kind of like what you were mentioning around the importance of access to high quality food, likely exacerbating existing nutritional and health disparities. All of this portends a potentially extreme scenario for brands in which private label in a scenario like this potentially makes much more sustained inroads for a longer term in consumer consideration sets when it comes to shopping. And there was some stats that we got from the Signal that just demonstrated how prolific and just deeply rooted the behaviors were around cost savings when it came to food purchasing. So based on the breadth of the actions represented across these two signals, these are vastly different. One is I'm going to buy more affordable food, or I'm going to sacrifice my nutrition, and the other is I'm going to move in with different people for long term. What other consumer behaviors do you think or that you're noticing that may arise due to this current economic landscape and cost of living pressures that food and beverage companies need to be aware of? Let's start with you, Danny.
Sure. So a really fun one that I would tag to our element of culture maximalism is that people are getting more creative with their food combinations, and we're seeing that come to life on platforms like TikTok, for example, where they're putting together things that you would never think should ever go together, but as a form of, this is what I have available in my house. I'm not going to go out and spend more money. I'm going to be resourceful here. And by the way, this is actually kind of good. Everyone check it out. So that's a consumer behavior that's kind of changing, is that we're seeing new flavors emerge and new flavor profiles come together just because people are needing to get more creative with the constraint that's placed upon them. A couple other things that I think about when it comes to these two signals is the first one with multi-generational households in general. We know that we're in a loneliness epidemic, and bringing people together and giving them a sense of community and staying with other people has long-term health benefits. So it's not necessarily that, they might not be eating all of the nutrients that they need, but their mental health might be better. Their health overall might be better because of the fact that they are now in a community-based setting and they're getting other needs met from a health standpoint. And then as it relates to the rising food costs and consumer behaviors that are maybe changing, you might have people trying to take on different things like fasting or looking at other new behaviors that help them cut back on their food costs to be more resourceful with when certain meal types come their way. So those are just a couple of things that came to mind for me.
I love the idea of, you were mentioning kind of the community angle of that and whether there's opportunity for, in times like this, for companies in the food and beverage space to really double down on that concept and lean into that as sort of a value proposition beyond just simply the caloric element of food, but to sort of get people to kind of continue, I guess, to sort of continue having interest in these brands via the lens of that communal sort of benefit and association that can come with it.
A couple brands that actually come to mind for that, PepsiCo and Lay's always come together with their Juntos program, kind of showing everything and people gathering around that. And I believe Coca-Cola recently did something with their family of brands as well about bringing people together with their entire profile that they have.
Oh, Terry.
I think it's such a great reframing of this point in that we always paint it in the negative. It's like a Gen Z or a millennial moves back in with family and it's because of inflation or high food cost or loss of job. And you're reframing it as part of community, of bond building. And I think there's something really powerful in that. And there's a lot of innovation that could come off of that if we think through that lens.
Analisa, what are your thoughts here?
I am one of those people who moved back in with my parents, starting in the pandemic, but then also realizing that being in community is such an amazing thing, and food is meant to be shared. There's a reason we also say never eat alone, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense. This is very much linked to like our ancestry and our roots that we lived in intergenerational households. That's very normal to live in community. What worries me more about this one is the perception of food, because food is a basic need and it's a right. And when we see stuff like prices are rising, so people are starting to sacrifice, that leads to political instability. I had an Uber driver the other day from Brazil who told me that the prices here were more expensive for the first time ever than in Brazil. And he was like, I've never experienced that in America. For me, America was always this, this, and this. So now should I be worried about something else or something bigger that's coming? So people have a very deep relationship to food. People need to eat. And I do think there's like a counter trend here where we also know that food is too cheap. That's been very well proven and documented. There's a lot of regulation coming out that's looking at true cost accounting, which means how do we price in the actual cost of what it takes to produce food because people aren't used to paying for it. So I do think prices are going to continue to go up, and I think that's going to correspond with the quality of the food, and we're definitely going to see that. But at the same time, we need to be careful of making sure that people have access to food and that they can actually take care of their nutrition and their overall well-being.
Crucial. Alice, I'd love to bring you in here and get your thoughts on, we've talked a lot about the behaviors that are emerging. What should brands be doing to kind of strategize around these emerging behaviors?
Yes, we are definitely seeing like the rise of food as medicine, as like, the rising food costs and the rising healthcare costs. It definitely like pushed the concept of food as medicine in the forefront. And, especially, like considering like the high death tolls around like, people per week in US and the enormous like, trillions amount of dollars spent each year due to like poor diet. And so we're definitely seeing like, both like experts and consumers, they are kind of like integrating like the concept of food as medicine into their purchase decisions. And in terms of like, the food and beverage brands, we're definitely seeing like the rise of like functionality. Functional food, would definitely have an edge in this like economic environment. And recent data proves that like consumers will continue purchasing even in this dynamic, and they will even buy more like performance-focused food and drinks in this current climate, partly due to the perceived functionality of it. So for food and beverage, I feel like the companies, the implication is like their ability to serve, multiple functions is highly appealing and to allows consumers to get the most value out of their money. And I feel like that's probably something like a low-hanging fruit that the food and beverage company could definitely tap into immediately, for near-term opportunities. Mm-hmm.
I love that idea of kind of in a similar vein as the community angle as a reason for still sort of building a strategy around the idea of positioning food as medicine in sort of times like this. I think when you mentioned the trade down effect that often behaviorally accompanies in an environment like this, reinforcing the aspect of what that sacrifice really means from a food as medicine standpoint, and the fact that that means you're giving up a lot of critical things that you need as a human in order to still be healthy and perform. It's a really fascinating idea. Also really intrigued by this aspect of that you were talking about with the creativity angle, sort of necessity as the mother of all invention sort of element of, okay, now it's time, maybe there's opportunity to really lean into creative food pairings and solutions here. And another thought was whether or not, I don't know the exact angle but if there's an element here to sort of really lean into promoting the reduction of food waste, that inherently takes place behaviorally regardless of economic times, but is that also an opportunity to sort of help mitigate some of the challenges that people are facing economically?
To build on that, Corey, marketer, I would keep three things in mind here. One was what you said was food waste. Shelf life, what are the foods that sort of extend shelf life or give an alternative to that? Because I think you can measure value that way. Sharing, what you all mentioned, I think of the Costco call that families often make to one another in terms of new bulk size purchases that might serve a variety of eaters or members of a family or group. And then I think the third is nutrition per dollar, effectively. How can food manufacturers and marketers better telegraph what kind of nutrition you're getting for the dollar you're spending on it and position products that way?
That's great. Yeah. Please, Analisa.
I would like to add, I think there's going to be a counter trend here or some competition because we've been talking very top down, but typically when prices go up, we also see grassroots initiatives and people taking things into their own hands, like you said, of getting creative. I do think that we're going to see more decentralized local solutions and a localization of the food system. This started back in the pandemic where we saw that global supply chains were not working as they should, and there's been a lot of efforts to safeguard that and think differently. I know that, for example, in Georgia, you have one of the largest food forests in the country, which was an underserved community that exists in a food desert that came together and said, let's have 2,000 different varieties of fruits, vegetables, nuts, other things that we can eat, and everything is free to the community. So it might be interesting to also see how communities come together in this frame as well to see how can we make sure that we can get food accessibly, because everyone can technically grow something.
Great.
Should we move into our second E?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds great. This is, in the STEEP analysis, this is the environmental element of STEEP, so we're going to be looking at implications in this space. In this particular discussion, we're going to be focusing on the idea of anti-plastic, one of the elements of culture that came up in our query on this topic. And I hate to say this, but these are going to be some scary signals that we're going to talk about here. The first one is around microplastics that have now been found in the human blood, which is not new. We've known about that since I think last year or even the year before, but now breast milk and placenta. So we're finding that the ability for plastic to cross barriers within human health is becoming more prevalent. Recent studies have discovered that these microplastics in human blood, tissue, breast milk, and placenta is raising concerns over the potential health impacts now to the point of children, pregnant mothers, etc. The direct health effects are not yet fully understood, admittedly, but microplastics may have a disruption in hormonal balance, reproductive function, and other potentially reproductive health and fertility, just to name a few in this particular that were highlighted in this particular signal. On the flip side, when we think about microplastics, not just simply in society or in people at large, let's talk about it really in the food and beverage lens, and that is a signal where microplastics have been found in 88% of sampled foods from a recent survey that was done, in which 16 different types of meats and meat-like alternatives were tested. This includes not just simply what we've been hearing around ocean-based proteins, but this was seafood, chicken breast, beef steaks, tofu, and plant-based burgers, all were seen to have microplastic. The other interesting aspect of it is that it was just as prevalent in land-sourced proteins as it was in ocean-sourced, and that there was no statistical difference in microplastic concentrations between ultra-processed products or fresh products. Basically, it's everywhere. That's in essence kind of the takeaway here. So plastic pollution, I think the interesting aspect about this particular space is that plastic pollution has historically been discussed in the context of broad environmental risk, relatively, I'll say ambiguously, or maybe not terribly tangible for an individual, but both of these signals are now examples of very personal fears and risks that we're seeing as it pertains to plastic, which may result in extreme consumer behavior or backlash because of this. Given that their packaging decisions may come under extreme fire and their product safety is now potentially also being affected, what strategies do food and beverage companies have to develop to mitigate the potential threats they face on both packaging and product fronts, knowing how personal this topic is now becoming?
Analisa, do you want to kick us off?
Oh boy, this is so thorny. Well, I think first, this is a really good example of how we are all one and we are all interconnected, and how what someone does in one place is affecting everything else. This is an issue that's literally affecting everyone. I do think that we saw in Chile, there's a very good example that they started putting excess sugar on different labels to really put that front of mind what this does contain versus hiding it on the back. I have certainly not heard of any companies or technologies that are able to filter out the microplastics. I don't know if you have, but I think that's a huge area for innovation, and it will probably be a next step that people throw a ton of money at to say, how do I prevent what's coming down the pipeline in terms of regulation, food safety, everything else? We're going to need whatever product we have to separate that or figure out how we do it. I think this could be a potentially huge industry, and of course there's a deeper root cause, which is us understanding how microplastics get into frickin' everything, and how do we clean that up and really change our behavior.
Yeah. Alice, do you have a thought here on what brands should be strategizing around this very top of mind consumer concern for 2024?
Definitely, we are seeing these like it's beyond sustainability at large, like the conversations around like microplastics, forever chemicals and packaging, and now like emphasize the urgency of like addressing immediate like health risks. So as like the near future like more research further uncovers like previously overlooked health issues beyond like microplastics, we are definitely can expect like a redefinition of clean labels. So the food and beverage companies should definitely think about like, the redefining clean labels and to own that, because like previously, it associated with pure, whole or healthy foods, for example, like clean labels, but like these labels will proactively adapt to the evolving expectations of consumers and expanding the scope to include like toxic-free, safe, health-conscious packaging, transforming these labels to like even bigger to represent the products that are completely clean, for both like environment and the personal health. Inside out clean label. So basically, we're definitely, we can definitely expect like the evolution of the definition of clean label in the future.
I love that idea of rethinking clean and redefining it. I think, we see quite often, I think very prevalently in the food and beverage space, the loss of meaning that can happen when you overuse a word, call it natural, call it organic, whatever the case may be. But this is sort of one of those examples, Alice, to your point, where clean can just take on a whole different breadth of meaning in a topic like this. I was also really sort of, my hypothesis in a similar vein to that is that knowing the potential for the personal reaction, I think there's something to be said differently around the fact that, as I mentioned, historically plastic has been talked about through the lens of environmental health, but now it's personal. And I wonder if there's going to be an audience or a consumer base who will gravitate towards any company that's bold enough to really lean into this clean idea, to really say, we are going to commit in the food and beverage space to be truly clean by X time and whatever, and if there's a potential space to carve out and own that before other movers in the industry do.
I think this is going to be so hard to own because it's such a structural issue that I'm going to be very curious if we see convergence across industries, because this is something that affects all built-in materials that we have in our world. So will we see different industries banding together, as we've seen in some other collaborations, to say, how could we make a different kind of plastic bottle? What is the alternative? We need to fund the R&D in that or think differently. I do think the consumer group that I've seen become most awake and active around this is mothers and parents who suddenly realize, oh my God, my baby, I need to take care of them. And I certainly follow a lot of influencers on Instagram who are already having this conversation, who advise people on what to buy, what to do, where to go. So there is definitely a lot of people that are already making consumer decisions based on this because of that.
I'm really intrigued by the cross-industry idea that you mentioned as well, because one of the elements that came up in the article is actually, I think that one of the significant sources of microplastics are woven fibers. So it's going to be from clothing. And so in that regard, figuring out whether there is sort of a cross-industry consortium that needs to be developed to really fight this at a more societal level.
And I think that's great because food and fiber already work together a lot on supply chain, and there's a lot of connections there. A lot of fibers come from the earth, so it's a very natural collaboration that they might work together.
Definitely. So, Eric, I saw your hand was up.
I'm thinking as we mentioned a bit earlier, right? Like we are really as one, as someone who is also enthusiastic about scuba diving, right? These are elements we release to the globe and it would end up somewhere, right? I'm wondering, as the discrepancy between different countries grow, is there some sort of effort that could sort of encourage sort of across the border kind of labeling and regulation measure that could help us as a whole to sort of elevate, not that we are having tight regulation here and then we are disposing plastic just on another side of the ocean, right? Another quick thing I want to mention is, would the discrepancy of the regulation, if we don't fix it sooner rather than later, would it be sort of encouraging / discouraging for people who are let's say mothers, right, to live in certain country or certain city versus others?
Fascinating. Analisa?
We are literally seeing this unfold in politics right now. If you've been following what's happened in Brussels, you have a lot of farmers who are protesting and literally spraying manure on the most important government buildings because the regulations in the EU are very strict for farmers in terms of what they have to adhere to. But then there's a lot of exceptions for goods that are imported. So yes, I do think we need global standards and universal truths around what we agree to as humanity, because you're going to have a lot of tension otherwise if there's double standards or different standards.
We're going to keep continuing this conversation around politics with our next and final letter of the STEEP analysis, the P. The element of culture that popped in our system for this segment was polarization. And so some of the macro signals that we were seeing were around how food and food systems are very political. And this is actually pointing to some research that found that political ideology had an impact on consumer preferences and food values. So a learning from this research is that conservatism is positively associated with naturalness and tradition and negatively with environmental impact. These results underscore the potential of political ideology as a predictor of food preferences, suggesting its potential application in developing targeted marketing, maybe product design, in line with someone's political beliefs. Accordingly, marketing and policy communications should be tailored to align with these nuances as they look to incorporate real change. The second signal that we were looking at here, another one in the realm of policy and polarization, we have President Biden taking aim at grocery chains over food prices. So Biden is pressuring large chains to reduce food prices, accusing them of profiting exclusively by exploiting consumers. And the move comes as high inflation weighs on Biden's approval rating, kind of like what you were saying before. Food is this necessary right, and when people feel like food is out of reach, they feel like the economy is not doing well, and it might impact his ability to win the nomination for president. So the provocative question here that I'd like us all to consider is, what strategies can a food and beverage company employ to ensure it's best positioned to negate the impacts of polarization and this very fraught political landscape that we find ourselves in? Danny, do you have any thoughts here?
Going back to the point of food as medicine being a big piece of this, and also thinking about the fact that on Netflix, a lot of the food documentaries are incredibly political. Dr. Peter Attia just came out with a criticism of the latest veganism documentary because he was pointing out in all of these studies that it was, well, yeah, the scientists who put together these meals for these twins were based off of, they had lower fat initially in the plan, but you can also have a high-fat vegan diet, which would not also be great. So thinking about the storytelling that comes with talking about food in general, culturally, and what that means for people and how they identify is something that has been political for a while. But if brands can start to think about how to peel back the layers a little bit more to say, we're going to be a lot more transparent with how we talk about how things are put together, how things are shared, what our supply chain looks like, and how it impacts your health or your body. So maybe even pairing this with the technology piece of things and weaving that into the process could be an interesting way to help combat some of the politicization that comes with food in general.
Analisa, as we move into an election cycle here in the U.S., what should brands be paying attention to as far as the polarization of the American public, specifically around food? We think about what it means to eat red meat versus drink soy milk and how that can kind of be divided around party lines. What are you thinking in this context?
I hope they don't pay attention to it. I think the last thing we need is people creating more separation and branding of being like, you can only eat this if you agree with these values, or you can only eat this if you agree with these values. It's just, food is for everyone. It's for everyone. And I don't think there should be marketing based on that because it creates more tension that's unnecessary.
Right.
To build on that, I I want to definitely goes back to the topic of community. I feel like food is such like a universal experience. Like it serves us out like a shared connection. So it's just so central to human experience. So I feel like in a world where polarization is widespread, like finding common ground can be very challenging right now. But like food cooperation like can play a crucial role in fostering the unity by celebrating our humanity, offering shared experience that bring people together. And especially mealtime is like such a sensory journey that can facilitate like relationship building. And I feel like over the past 3 years, we just only very few things that have reliably brought people from opposite sides together. Like, I don't know, like Game of Thrones, esports, and food. And with Game of Thrones, like concluded, there are even fewer topics left for multi-generational families to discuss safely. I feel like this presents like an opportunity for food companies to provide that collective experience that, bridge divides, for different groups of people. I feel like the food and beverage companies could think about like to provide that shared experience and community for people.
If I can just build on that, I think that's brilliant, and it's so needed, and there's not enough of it. And we also know that a lot of wars in the past have been fought over food and accessibility. So I think when we talk about politics, it's making sure that there is enough food for everyone and that people are not getting competitive about it, or there's not that scarcity mindset. There is a lot of abundance. I'm sure you guys know 1/3 of all food is lost and wasted, as we heard from the audience before. Food waste is huge. So it's more about how do we distribute our resources and access them rather than who gets what or who's right for what or what's better. It's all just noise. That's just noise.
I think we're going to move into a round of takeaways to finish off the session. Today, over the course of the discussion, we've talked about the major influences impacting 2024 in the food and beverage space. So I'd love for us to go around and just talk about a key takeaway that you think brands should be paying attention to. What do you think, in your mind, you'd prioritize as get on this? This is the white space. This is the strategy that you're seeing as most important. Danny, I'll start with you.
The pressure of being first. Going back to the comment about in times of restraint is when the greatest creativity comes. So recommending to brands to actually look at where are those areas that seem like they're the biggest challenges and be more creative around that, because people don't need another SKU like Analisa was saying of telling them that this is high protein, low sugar, and is not going to impact your glucose in whatever way. So looking more for where are those challenging areas and being more creative around creating solutions for that.
Analisa?
Oh, can I say 3? I mean, yeah, very pissed. I think one big theme is trust. Who do you trust? Who do you listen to, especially with the rise of more information? How do you know what's right for you? There's definitely going to be a lot of sense making there. But I love our conversation today around those ideas of community and unity and going back to the roots of food and what food is and why why we need it in our relationship. I think that's totally white space that could be dialed up a lot more.
We'll do Alice and then Corey, you'll finish us off.
I feel like definitely, the near-term low-hanging fruit will be like bring true values to consumers in this like current economic environment. Like just bring like true values that consumer truly care to consumers, and also like the shared connection we talk about, like how can food bring people together that provide that collective experience, that bridge device. I feel like that could be another topic I feel like brands could explore in the coming future. It, especially polarization will definitely continue to rise. In the coming years. Yeah.
Corey, final thought?
Yeah, mine's less of a tactic, but more of just a personal takeaway. I'll caveat by saying anybody who knows me knows I'm generally a very cynical, pessimistic person. So when we were going through this setting up this discussion today, I was a little bit apprehensive about all the negative topics. We were talking about people having to navigate economic, political turmoil and concerns, et cetera. And one of the things that I was unexpectedly didn't expect to see in this discussion was all of the positive ideas that were surfaced today for how food and beverage could address those, be it all the different solutions we talked about when we were talking about the economical part of our discussion in community or food, or leaning into creativity and food waste, to even elevating and standing above the political fray to bring people together as a non sort of political space. Just sort of surprisingly moved me a little bit to say, there's a lot of great things that are at our disposal in the food and beverage marketing and advertising space that can hopefully help alleviate a lot of these challenges that people are facing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's going to take us through today's discussion. Thank you to everyone that joined on the panel and joined in person, online. We love when you tune in. Analisa, of course, a pleasure to have you. For those of you interested in continuing to watch our briefings, we go live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. This Thursday, we're going to be talking about Gen Z and their approach to loyalty, so you won't want to miss that discussion. But until then, you can consider yourselves briefed.